So, last year, a writer called Patrick Flanery had his debut novel published by Atlantic Books. The novel was called Absolution. I read it right at the beginning of the year and I loved it so much that I included it in my end of the year books roundup. It's a fantastic debut novel, written with great maturity and very, very assured, and had a multi stranded narrative which nicely reflected the complicated politics of South Africa in which the novel was set. His second novel, Fallen Land, is published again by Atlantic Books and is set in America. You could say it looks at the failure of the American dream. It again has a multi-stranded narrative. There are three main strands to it. The book actually opens with a lynching which occurs on the land in question and sets the book in a slightly wider historical context. But as I said, there are three main strands to the story here. The first of which you could say is about Paul Krovic, who is the man who bought this land, who wanted to build a development of rather impressive houses on it. He overstretched himself and ended up having to sell not only his own house but the entire development at a huge loss. The young family moving into the house that he built for himself and his family are Julia and Nathaniel, and they have a son called Copley. And it's Nathaniel's work that's brought them to this new area of the country that they live in. I'll go into more detail about the work that he does later. And the third strand is Louise, whose family originally owned the land. She still lives at the very edge of it in a dilapidated hut. And she has a kind of relationship with the young boy, Copley. They have established contact. It's quite complicated to try and sum up the three strands of the storyline here, but let's just say that Paul Krovic was a man who believed in protecting his family at all costs. A man who had sort of set himself at war with the rest of the world, even against the world, the country that he lived in. And to that end, he had built a rather impressive bunker, I suppose you could call it, leading from underneath his house. And in fact, he has interred himself in that bunker by the time Julia and Nathaniel move into it. Nathaniel is desperate to impress at work and move up the promotional ladder. Julia is obsessed with making this vast house that they've just bought into something far more like what they're used to living in, something a bit more modern. So she sets about painting everything white, looks around own house, and the two of them are so obsessed with the various elements that they're not very focused on their own child, who keeps trying to tell them that he thinks that there is somebody in their house. I'll leave you to work out who that is. And in the third strand, we have Louise, who lives on the edge of this property and has been sidelined entirely from the rights that she has to the land, but is fully aware of what's going on with young Copley, whilst her parents aren't. If I have a criticism of the book, it is that almost all of the characters are a bit bonkers right from the off, and it means that the level at which you come in at the novel sometimes makes it hard to believe. As this develops, it develops brilliantly because the lines between reality and non-reality are very, very blurred, and it makes it a fascinating read. It's also a traumatic read because you or I anyway, as a parent, reading it with Copley in mind, are just desperate to sort of shake everybody by the shoulders and get them to listen to him and what he's saying. And as the stakes are ramped up and as peril approaches, I found it very, very difficult to read, actually. And in fact, the closing chapters are incredibly affecting. I do think that Flanery is a writer well worth keeping an eye on and reading. Both in this book and in Absolution, he's brilliant at adapting his prose to suit each of the three narrative voices. Each section reads very, very differently, and he really helps to get you inside each of those characters as a result of that. As I said, I had a slight problem with just how mad everybody was, but I was absolutely drawn into each of those characters because of the quality of the writing that he gives each of them. It is terrifying as the book progresses, and a very, very complex novel about a country and a society and a way of living. He's written about South Africa, he's written about America. I'd be very, very interested to see what he writes about next, and how he goes about it. It's available now from Atlantic Books, and again, highly recommended. Hopefully the next book that I'll be looking at will be The Machine by James Smythe. I suppose you could describe it as science fiction, but it's slightly more interesting than that. I'll tell you more about that soon. Goodbye.